Will Florida State flip any commitments from other schools? And vice versa, how many players should fans expect the Noles to lose that are currently committed?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith. Thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. This is a fun podcast for me, and I hope you all enjoy it. So please hit that like button and that notification bell and share this podcast. I truly appreciate it. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. I'm going to just explain a scenario that's starting to take fold, not just with Florida State, across college football, but primarily talk about Florida State today, and that is the decommitment commitment scenarios and why it's going to be more volatile this year than ever before and by a landslide. The biggest weekend for the Noles is the 21st through the 23rd. I'm sure most of you that follow recruiting know that. And they've got a handful of commitments of really good players, and guys could already flip. But here's the scenario to set this up. If you take nothing else from this podcast, know the following. This year, by a million miles, we're seeing more kids leave home, at least in their commitment, and selecting a school. It could be Florida State. It could be somebody else. The point is this. At the end of the day, this has been going on for decades. Kids at the end oftentimes flip their commitment to a closer school. That's not going to change. Sometimes guys, you know what? I just don't want to go that far from home. That's cool. We've seen so much of it. You're going to see more and more of this. Florida State's going to benefit probably a little more than some others because a lot of kids leave Florida originally, like Dallas Wilson. I still think Florida State has a great chance to flip him. That's just one. He's from Tampa Bay Tech. He's committed to Oregon. It's a long way from Tampa to Eugene, Oregon. Those are the kinds of scenarios. So here's the deal. Florida State is going to be in the middle of as many, if not more, battles with kids that are flip candidates from their program to others and vice versa than about any school in the country. That is true. Do not, however, and fans have a terrible tendency with this, the sky is falling when they lose one kid. I guarantee you one or two kids is going to decommit from Florida State between now and the time signing day happens in early December. It's par for the course. If you only have one or two, you're probably below par compared to what some other schools have. It happens to Georgia. It happens to Ohio State. It happens to Notre Dame. It happens to Texas A&M. It happens to everybody. So I want to just go over a few names, kind of give you a ballpark idea, some things that I've heard, some conversations that I've had with some of these kids, and just put it in perspective before we get into this coming weekend. I'm going to preview Florida State's list on Thursday and Friday for this upcoming weekend. And then next week, the 21st weekend is massive. It'll be a little more about preview throughout the week to try to get a better feel for it. But let's start with this. The player that most people are worried about in this class. There's a couple, depends on which one you want to go with that you think is more likely. But Solomon Thomas from Raines High School in Jacksonville could leave. Certainly Florida's after him, LSU, Miami, and many others. But those are the three that have the best chance. And then Javion Hilson, the pass rusher that I know well from Cocoa High School, state champs last year, he's looking at Florida. He's looking at Texas. He's looking at UCF. Great football player, great kid, very nice young man. Florida State's probably going to get him. He was just at camp too, which helps. But you're going to have guys come after arguably the best pass rusher in the country. I've seen him from 5 feet away go one-on-one over and over and over again. He's a dude, and he's a guy that gets after it in a million different ways. If you're not in on kids like him, forget about him being committed. You have no chance to win the national title. And kids like him are going to have everybody and their brother coming after him until he signs. It's just part of it. Recruiting, though, is so wild. Like, I didn't even know Texas was involved, and all of a sudden they're getting an OB with him. I don't think he's a kid that's going to end up there, but if he flipped, I would bet that he ended up flipping to somebody else before he signed. It is volatile. So, number one, Florida State's going to lose somebody. You just hope it's not your elite kids. And two, they're probably going to gain some guys too. Over half the kids from Florida now leave the state. So that includes the portal. You might get some kids after they sign, but Florida State's going to be good there. I like Florida State long-term for Hilson. I think he's a fit, and he really likes their staff. Talking about it from a positive perspective, a kid they're going to bring in pretty soon is Tarvos Alford for a visit. He's from Florida. He's a kid that he's been all over. Everybody's known about him forever. He was future 50 All-American. Last year's an underclassman at the Under Armour event down at IMG that I saw. I'm like, okay, this is a guy. Really good athlete. He's at Vero Beach, which is a program that's always got players. Everybody recruits. He's committed to Ohio State. That's a kid I think that Florida State fans should keep an eye on. He fits the scheme. He's really good in space. He's speed over power. He's a strong kid, but he's just so fast for his size. He's a little over 200 pounds. That guy fits what Florida State does on defense. If there's a kid that not enough people are talking about Florida State could flip, it would be him, because I just think if they get him on campus enough times, he's such a fit, and he's from just a scheme standpoint, he could play will, he could play the overhang linebacker position. That's a guy I would not be surprised if he ended up in a Florida State uniform. Just throwing out, I get Ohio State's got a great program, all that, but it's a long way from Vero Beach to Columbus, Ohio. Just saying. If there's anybody that Florida State flips out of any position this year, this is just my opinion, that if you could pick one, it's the following player. Justice Terry, I've talked about him a few times on this show. Florida State is considered a long shot. But again, as I've said many times on this show, this is the kind of player that Bobby Bowden and his staff found a way to get 25, 35 years ago. They always did. And it's why they were in the top four. What was it, 14 years in a row they finished the top four? Because guys like this ended up at Florida State instead of in Gainesville, instead of in Athens, instead of Tuscaloosa, instead of Auburn, Alabama, whatever it is. They found a way to get these kids. He's from Manchester, Georgia. It's a little 1A school, not that far from the Alabama line. Offers from across the country. He's committed to SC, but most people think he'll end up at Georgia. Great kid. Defensive end, defensive tackle, it doesn't even matter. He is a special football player. Great guy. He's the person you want in your locker room. FSU has him on campus this weekend. If I had a nickel for every time I complained about Florida State not doing better with elite D-line recruiting, I'd be a rich man. This is an example in how you can change the narrative. Florida State needs to make this flip. I don't know if it's realistic, but they still need it. You have to eventually get the guys that everybody wants. This is a guy that's about as high up on the board for Georgia as it gets. Pretty self-explanatory on whether or not he can play, and I've seen him compete multiple times. He's tremendous in one-on-ones. Doesn't matter if it's pass rush, setting the edge, chasing guys down from behind that weigh 50, 60, 70 pounds less than him. Big-time player. Justice Terry is elite. Finally, and this is a little bit more unusual for some reason. I'm surprised there's been a little more this year. Maybe it'll trend this way more as year goes on. But UCF and Florida State haven't butted heads quite as much this year. Tony Williams is the kid from South Florida that they have a chance at. He can play corner, he can play safety. That's an interesting battle. Like UCF is doing everything they can to kind of get over the hump. They're a pretty good program, but they haven't got over the hump yet. They can't afford to lose somebody like Tony, especially a defensive player. They struggle more defensive guys than they do offensive in recruiting. If Florida State can flip him, that's not only a good thing for your program, but you're taking a shot against an in-state rival. I wonder how much that comes into play. And I honestly don't know that answer. But taking a player away from somebody in your state that's trying to climb the ladder like like UCF is, I would think matters to the other schools. They don't want to see UCF become a power because that makes it harder to recruit. This is the kind of recruitment that UCF has to win more than FSU. Tony Williams is a good DB, all that. It wouldn't matter if he was the best player in the country or whatever. You can't have one of the tradition schools, FSU, Miami, or Florida, take a kid away from you if you're UCF. That's hard on you. Tony Williams is an important recruitment. Now, to wrap up this short edition here, the only thing I want to say is over the next week to 10 days, you're going to see a spattering of commitments across the country. And then about the 23rd, 24th, right after that big weekend Florida State has, it will be massive. But you're going to see a plethora of kids commit. Like, it's just going to be an explosion. You're going to see announcement dates, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, whatever. It is going to be wild. Florida State, I forget exact number what they have commitment, But if they got another 5 to 8 commitments between now and, say, the 10th of July, it would not surprise me. They backloaded their official visits. It's the way that Norvell and his staff wanted to do it. The 21st is the primary goal. It is a loaded group of prospects. So you're going to have to be a little more patient with the commitments, but it's their plan. And that is also the last weekend that NCAA has for official visits before they go into a period where you're not allowed to have them, a dead period, if you will. So Florida State has progressed well to get to this point. We're 1 week out from like the recruiting palooza, if you will. So keep that in mind. Once again, please like and subscribe to this podcast and share it wherever you can. Tomorrow, we're going to start getting in more in depth. I'm hoping to get some more finalizations at the last piece here. It's been amazing how many kids have changed visits in the last week, not just Florida State, but across the country. And that's why I've waited as long as I have to like go in depth on a bunch of previews, because these kids just changing their visits like crazy. So it's been a little more difficult than I would like, but we're going to dump into that a little bit more on Thursday. This has been Locked On Seminoles. Everybody have a great rest of your day.